Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our Pretreatment Stakeholder Meeting here at the TCEQ. My name is Erica Crespo. I'm the Assistant Deputy Director at the Water Quality Division. I am filling in for Robert Sadler, our Deputy Director, and I'm so happy to see faces in the audience, and thank you all so much for continuing to engage in this productive and positive interaction, because the service that the pretreatment team provides is very important to us, and we want to do the best with with you all and how we interact. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Colleen, and she's going to introduce the team, and we'll go ahead and get started, okay? And again, thank you so much for sharing your time with us this afternoon.
Thank you, Erica. Okay. Welcome again, everyone. I'm going to sit over here. I think it's a little less awkward and I can see the screen. So welcome. Thank you for joining us. Unfortunately, the live webcast, as Erica said, isn't working, so it will be recorded and then posted later, hopefully later today. So we will be providing some updates to the TCEQ pretreatment program that are likely to impact our CAs and your industrial users. We were able to meet and chat with a lot of you at Region 6, which was a pleasure. But for those that we didn't get a chance to talk with, I wanted to quickly introduce the team. Again, I'm Colleen Cook. I'm the pretreatment team leader. I have Ms. Bridget Malone, Ms. Jessica Alcacer, Dr. Erin Darling, and Ms. Amy Golden-Leddy. We also have a new pretreatment coordinator. I'm so pleased. Unfortunately, she's unable to be here, but our recent addition is Ms. Joanna Hunsberger, who is joining the team as of September 1st. And even though the live webcast, we're having technical difficulties, for those who are watching the recording, you can submit any questions that you have about the presentation at outreach@tceq.texas.gov. Okay, so on the screen you can see our agenda for this afternoon. There are also hard copies for those of you who are in person who would like to follow along as we move through the presentation this afternoon. We will be going over a couple of different topics. So Bridget and I will be reviewing updates to this year's pretreatment audits, as well as other updates to TCEQ's program implementation, including TBLL data requirements, the status of our substantial modification approvals, and the permit action process needed for those approvals, as well as the status of our new developing program, and then finally some updates to the Title VI requirements that will impact the permit actions needed for those modifications. And then from there, we'll hand it over to Jessica, and she will be reviewing some regulatory updates that could potentially impact you guys. So again, if you attended the conference last month, some of this information you will have heard already, but we will be providing some new updates as well. Throughout the presentation, we will have plenty of time to open up the floor for a question and answer session after each topic. Then after the presentation, we're happy to answer any questions that you have on any of the material that we covered or any other topics that you would like to discuss. As always, we encourage your questions, the open dialogue, and we hope that this can be a beneficial space where we can all learn from each other. And then again, if you are watching the recording, you can submit any questions for the team that you have on these topics at outreach@tceq.texas.gov. Okay, so first up, we're going to discuss a few of the common violations we have seen in our audits the last couple of years, and then update you on what our audit process is going to look like moving forward as we move away from those strictly remote audits that we've been conducting since the spring of 2020 when COVID hit. Okay, so hopefully the TV screens you can see a little bit better. I know that font is a little small, but I'm just going to go through some of the common violations that we've seen over the last couple of years, things to look out for, as you're implementing your program. So number one, failure to follow the approved program's enforcement response guide or enforcement response plan. So as a program, you want to make sure that if a violation is identified, you are following the enforcement responses and timeframes that are identified in your ERP. So as you all know, a big portion, a big chunk of what our audits look at are the industrial user files, conducting our reviews and reviewing violations that were identified to ensure that the CU, one, identified the violation, and then two, followed their ERP and issued the appropriate response. Number two, failure to submit modifications to TCEQ. So the majority of the violations that we saw in regards to this one were for failure to submit the one-time dental compliance report form. However, it is important to note that anytime a change or update to the program is made, a modification should be submitted to TCEQ for review and approval. Number 3, failure to evaluate S&C for all SIUs as required by 40 CFR 403.8 A through H. So please, a couple of things on this one that we noticed. A lot of times we'll see S&C evaluated and documented for criteria A and B, those numeric criteria, but a lot of times those narrative criteria C through H aren't looked at or they're not documented. So making sure that you're evaluating for A through H and then also appropriately documenting that evaluation. Number 4, failure to conduct wastewater treatment plant influent and effluent monitoring as required by your TPDES permit. So for example, we occasionally see missing pollutants from analysis. Please keep in mind that CAs must keep current with the pollutant list in all regulations, as the TPDES permit may have outdated tables if it's been a while since the permit has been renewed. You are required to test for all pollutants. We've also seen instances of CAs monitoring results not matching the required frequency dictated in their TPDES permit. So this, if you're required to monitor semi-annually, making sure that you're doing that once per 6 months and you're not, doing, 2 monitoring events within that first 6 months period, because that's not following the appropriate frequency as dictated in your permit. Number 5, failure to review with sufficient care reports and or chain of custody forms to identify noncompliances. So as a CA, you want to make sure that all monitoring results are being reviewed timely and efficiently in order to identify those violations. So making sure the monitoring report was submitted on time is really just the very first step in your review. Number 6, failure to ensure that all reports submitted by IUs contain the required certification statements and signatures from the authorized representatives. So you want to check for the certification and all submitted reports, as well as ensuring that the appropriate representative signed the statement. And then number 7, failure to include all applicable effluent limits in the IU permit. So this includes the categorical standards and local limits. So you want to make sure that those categorical standards in your permits match the federal regulations for that category, as well as ensuring that the local limits included match what's in your approved ordinance. So just make sure you're being consistent. Okay, so moving on to fiscal year 23's audit process. So we officially kicked off this fiscal year at the beginning of this month, and our first audit will be in a couple of weeks. So as most of you know, the last couple of years, we've been conducting required program audits on a strictly remote basis due to the pandemic. There have been both positives and negatives to this approach. And taking all of these into account, we will be moving forward with a hybrid audit approach for this fiscal year. So we'll take what worked with the remote audits and leave behind what didn't. These new hybrid audits will consist of pre-audit electronic industrial user file requests. Pre-audit IU file requests allow us to perform these file reviews prior to the field portion of the audit and increase the scope of the universe reviewed. We will request electronic copies of these files prior to the start of the audit so we can conduct our IU file reviews. And then additionally, the audit will consist of in-person initial interviews and site visits, but implement a virtual exit meeting. So this will allow us to get back in the field, have some face-to-face interaction with you guys, really see your program, boots on the ground, but then also, allow for that efficiency of completing those file reviews before we get out there. It is vital that internet accessibility it will be required to ensure that that staff have the ability to not only communicate with our staff, who are assisting back in the central office, but also continue to access those pre-audit file reviews. So if you have issues with internet accessibility, please just let us know as soon as possible prior to the start of the audit so we can plan accordingly. Okay, so before we move on to TBLL redevelopment updates, are there any questions about audits? Previous audits, how the next audit year will look? Okay, So now moving on to everyone's favorite TBLL redevelopment submissions. So as most of you know, historically TCEQ has required that POTWs conduct a 4 to 7 consecutive day sampling event to collect the data that will be used during TBLL redevelopments. But in response to feedback from programs and you guys, and to be consistent with the 2004 EPA local limits guidance, TCEQ may now choose to accept routine monitoring data in lieu of or in addition to conducting a 7 consecutive day sampling event for these calculations. However, this data will have to meet a certain standard in order to be accepted, and the next few slides will go over the criteria TCEQ will use in order to determine if your routine monitoring data will be acceptable to use for your redevelopment. And then I would also like to take this opportunity to encourage all programs that if you are considering redeveloping and are interested in pursuing this alternative approach using routine monitoring data, please reach out to us, the pretreatment team, any one of us, to discuss prior to submission. We're happy to set up a Teams call if you want to come in office and meet with us. We just want to make sure that CAs and programs are clear on all of the expectations as we roll out this alternative option. Okay, so let's take a look at the criteria that must be met before using this data, this routine monitoring data and TBLL redevelopments. So number one, the POTW must have conducted a recent initial influence scan to identify their pollutants of concerns for the wastewater treatment plant. So this requirement is not new. It's the same as it's always been. No matter what approach you take to redevelop your limits, an initial influence scan will be required to identify those POCs. Number two, the POTW must have conducted routine monitoring events at the wastewater treatment plants, meeting the minimum frequency of the routine monitoring outlined in EPA's 2004 local limits guidance. EPA states that ongoing evaluations of TBLLs can use sampling data collected at the minimum frequencies in Table 4-2, and we will take a look at this table on the next slide. Number three, at this time we are requiring a minimum of 8 routine sampling events for influent and effluent sampling locations. All routine monitoring data to be used must be from within the past 3 years in order to be representative. So for example, a wastewater treatment plant that performs quarterly influent and effluent monitoring or 4 sampling events per year would be required to submit a minimum of 2 years of routine monitoring data for a total of 8 sampling events. So you can see, I know it's a little small, but this is pulled straight from that 2004 EPA local limits guidance, Table 4-2, that outlines the minimum recommended sampling frequencies in order to use your routine monitoring data. The required frequency is based on the type of pollutant and the size of the plant. So as you can see, or hopefully you can see, the type of parameter is listed on the left-hand side, and then the plant flow, 1 million gallons per day, is listed along the top. So in order to use this routine monitoring data for existing local limits, you can see a minimum of quarterly influent and effluent data will be needed. And this is regardless of the size of the plant. However, if a POC is identified in the initial pollutant scan that falls under those Table 2 or Chapter 307 pollutants, where the organic priority pollutants reside, routine sampling at a minimum of once per year or once per 6 months may be acceptable. But please keep in mind that if your data does not provide 8 representative data points for a pollutant of concern within that 3-year representative time frame, then additional sampling may be needed. Okay, so moving on to the last of the criteria that we'll be looking at. Number 4, the sampling and analytical procedures shall be in accordance with guidelines established in 40 CFR, Part 136, or as suggested in Tables E1 and E2 of the procedures to implement the Texas Surface Water Quality Standards. This is not a new requirement and shouldn't be a surprise. So this is something, again, regardless of the approach that you take, number 4 is going to apply to your data. And then similar to number 4, number 5, all routine monitoring data the CA wishes to use for TBLL calculations must have been collected and analyzed in accordance with TBLL data requirements as outlined in the 2004 EPA local limits guidance. So this means all laboratory reports and associated chain of custody forms must be submitted for the routine monitoring event the CA wishes to use in the TBLL calculations. And then additionally, the data being proposed should be the same results reported in the annual report submissions. So if any data is found to be deficient, the TCEQ may require additional monitoring, or we certainly may have some questions. Okay, number 6, please pay close attention to this one. It's a very important consideration when determining what data is acceptable. So the CA should ensure that the most representative data of actual and current conditions at the facility are being used for their calculations. Conditions at the plant should have remained consistent throughout the time frame associated with the data being used. We want to make sure that the final limits are representative of the conditions of the plant. That's really important. So in order to utilize routine monitoring data, the CA should certify that the data is still representative of current conditions at the facility and should include a detailed justification for the selection of sampling events used for the data. So this is particularly true if the CA wishes to omit a sampling event from within the time frame being used. We'll need an explanation for why that sampling event is not being used and why it's not representative of the conditions of the plant anymore. And please also keep in mind there should have been no significant changes at the wastewater treatment plant or within the POTW from the start of the time frame associated with the routine monitoring data. If there have been recent changes at the facility, the TCEQ may determine that this routine data collected from previous years may not, in fact, be representative of the current and future operating conditions at the facility. So just the same as if there's a major upgrade at the plant, the conditions at the plant change and you're required to do a redevelopment, the same, line of thinking is if that occurs during the routine monitoring period you would like to use, then it may not be reflective of the current conditions at the plant. And then finally, number 7, wastewater treatment plants will still be required to conduct domestic and commercial sampling events throughout the POTW service area in order to obtain the representative background data needed for TBLL calculations. And again, this one is not new, but we did want to highlight that this is still a requirement for your routine monitoring approach. And that is all I have for the TBLL redevelopment data updates. Do we have any questions? Chris?
Do you have a SOP to that effect?
We are working on finalizing some guidance that we'll be able to provide to you guys that includes all this information that we're looking at. Yes.
That's great. I'm glad. So I asked whether the SOP has been created. The second question, you said we are working on finalizing it. May we have a chance as a stakeholder group to say, before you finalize it, can we suggest the following edits? Because I like the way you sometimes said, if you don't, we will take a closer look at this. Mm-hmm. And so I'd like that flexibility when there is reason to. Okay, so we have 8 sampling events, except for mercury, we missed one, right? Mm-hmm. Do I have to rethink the whole thing, or can I work with you? So I would like that kind of flexibility expressed in it. Here you talk about several times required, I think. Maybe not. But anyhow, if you would give the stakeholder groups an opportunity to say, here is our draft SOP. Mm-hmm. Do you have any inputs before you finalize it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that we could work with you on, provide you what, is the draft, so to speak, of those criteria, get your feedback, and then incorporate any, suggestions that we can. I don't think that's too big of an ask. Absolutely. Joseph.
So while we're talking about redevelopment, we've got a couple of emerging pollutants of concern. As far as development of TBLLs is concerned, are you guys working on anything for PFAS or TMAH, QACs, anything, thiourea, anything like that?
At this time, no, we don't have anything in the works. We're still kind of waiting on final direction from EPA, especially on the PFAS. Jessica, do you have anything to add to that?
No, not at this time. I do know that once the rest of the agency and division takes a look at how the TPDES permits may be affected by the PFAS and any PFAS final effluent limits, then that might trigger us to add it to the pollutant of concern list.
So a follow-up to that then, let's remove PFAS from the table because that's the hot button topic for everybody else in this, but there are other emerging contaminants of concern, right? Like personally, TRA's submitted some TBLLs for QACs and TMAH. There's no approved method for this.
Right.
How are we supposed to protect our plants and stuff without that kind of backing under traditional TBLL development, right? It's a concern to me personally because my plant's impacted or multiple plants are, but what can we do for y'all to help expedite that as more and more pollutants become known to be inhibitory at projects? I mean, I can do site-specific limits. It's in my program, and my customer ordinances have that, but it's not truly protective enough, right? So how do we go to the next on the development, not necessarily redevelopment? So I apologize on getting a little off topic for that.
No, that's a great question, and we appreciate that feedback. To be honest, the TRA program is the first one that I have seen with those additional pollutants, those QACs, and that was something new for us. So we will need to take a look into it more and put together some research and see what guidance we can provide for y'all. Obviously, y'all put together what you could with the resources, used literature values, did a lot of your own things with that, but we can definitely look into it more and see what kind of guidance we can provide to our programs.
Thank you.
Any more TBLL questions? Okay. Thanks, guys. I'm going to hand it over to Bridget now.
Thank you, Colleen. So as you all know, we are diligently chipping away at our next backlog project, which is the completion and final approval of the pending substantial modifications, which will incorporate the technically completed approved programs into the TPDES permit through either a staff-initiated amendment or a dovetail process using a pending permit application. So as discussed at Region 6, you can see that over half of the pending modifications have been completed, or we are currently processing a TPDES permit action for them. We started with about 19 pending modifications and currently have only 8 remaining. So again, we appreciate your patience as we work on streamlining the permitting process. As part of streamlining our approval process for the substantial modifications, we are looking at updating our internal processes, and the first thing we're going to be updating is what is actually required to be submitted with the final package. So as you all know, currently we request 4 hard copies of the final modified program and the Tech Complete notification. However, moving forward, we will only be requesting 2 hard copies and 1 electronic copy. So hopefully this is good news for everyone and will reduce the excess paper usage, postage costs for shipping documents, and it's very beneficial. So again, when we do submit that Tech Complete letter to y'all and request the final program modification copies, we'll only need 2 hard copies and 1 digital copy. Additionally, the pretreatment team has streamlined the TPDES permitting process in order to approve and incorporate these submods in a timelier manner. We've been working with the municipal team to look at internal processes again. Previously, this process averaged about 180 days, when it's initiated to when we're sending it down to CCO's office. But now this first one we've looked at, we've kind of have it on track to hopefully get to CCO within 60 days. So that's over 50% approval on the timeline. So hopefully that is helpful for people who are trying to get these modifications incorporated into their TPDES permits. So as discussed, we will now be requesting a digital copy of the final submod submittals. The most efficient way and secure way to submit it to us electronically is through the TCEQ FTPS system. And this site will also be utilized during our audits for file reviews. So when we request the file reviews, the electronic copies, we'll want y'all to upload it to the FTPS system. This is also a great site if you've submitted something and want to add some sort of revision or addendum. It gets this to us pretty quickly. But it's mostly used for very large files. So when we're requesting documentation and it's too big to email, this is the system we will be using, the FTPS, and we are going to do a quick demo. Again, with large files, this will also include those final approved programs. We know they're pretty big. If anyone has a digital copy they would like to share, we would appreciate that. As part of looking at our internal processes, we've also been digitizing our records. Right now, that includes a lot of scanning. So if anyone has a complete digital copy of their program and would like to upload it, we would appreciate that. So now I'm going to do a quick walkthrough of the FTPS. Again, these links will be available on the Pretreatment Stakeholders webpage and also this presentation. So you will be able to utilize these links. But hopefully this walkthrough will work. And if you haven't used FTPS before, hopefully this will be helpful. So the first thing you need to do is create an account. So if you click on that link that was in the presentation, it will take you straight to our external website, which has pretty complete instructions on how to create an account. There's some great screenshots available. Just follow them to create your account. Pretty easy. Again, these instructions will be online. There will be a link available in our presentation, which will be posted online. So once you've gone through these and created an actual account, then you can turn around and start uploading and sharing the files. So once you create your account with your username and password, you'll just come in here and log in. This is kind of like the home screen for the FTPS. Shows you, the files you've got, files from others. This is where you can do all your uploading and sharing. I think only half of the screen is showing right now, unfortunately. So at this point, there should be an option. You would see like the files listed to the left side. To upload the files, you just come down here, click Upload Files. It'll bring up whatever files or folders you have on your computer that you would like to use. Pretty simple. Click on it. I know you can't see the left side, but if you notice, there has been another document added with this gray line. Once you have that document added, you can click Share. So there's a box you can click on. Again, these instructions will be posted and have better screenshots. So once you actually upload a document, you still have to turn around and share it with someone. So you would just click the box, come up here to Share, and here's where you can type in who you're going to share it with. Jessica. Add that. And then click OK. And OK again. So again, after you upload the documents, you still have to turn around and share them. A lot of people will upload documents but forget to share them. Once you've shared them, this will pop up and it will say it has been shared, as well as you should be receiving an email, and the recipient should also be receiving an email letting them know that you've shared a file with them. So again, not too complicated. Once you do it a couple times, it's pretty easy. Again, if y'all have any questions about this or need another demo or any follow-up, just let me know.
Reports?
Yes, so with annual reports, we do still require the hard copy because it is signed and certified. But if you want to expedite our review, you can send a digital copy as well concurrently. Because we do review them, but we still, unfortunately, still do require the hard copy submittal. But we're perfectly okay with one hard copy and one digital.
Substantial modifications, anything we can upload in addition to putting it in mail.
Yes, we're going to need the hard copy still, but yes, this FTPS is perfect for anything else. You just like, hey, I put it in the mail, here's the digital copy. We can start looking at it quicker. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I wonder about confidentiality. I can't think of an example right now, but I mentioned there may be situations where the client would be concerned to upload? How long do the files reside there? And
They're only there for 7 days.
Others?
They're there for 7 days, and that's all listed in the instructions when you create an account. It is a secure website, but it's only there for 7 days, and then it's only visible by who you share it to. So if you only email it to me, no one else on my team can even see it.
And is this for pretreatment only, or is it?
No, it's an agency-wide website. Okay. It's the TCQ's secure file sharing website. All right. So moving on. At the start of 2022, we had 8 new developing program submittals awaiting approval, but one pending one has recently been completed, so that's good. So now there are only 7 remaining new developing programs awaiting review, and pretreatment staff have already picked up the second one and started the technical review. So good news for that. During this time, staff will be reaching out to the developing program contacts to confirm that we have all the updated items and element of the program. During the review, we plan to implement a collaborative process in which we will schedule either Teams meetings or conference calls to go over any deficiencies that may come up so they can be resolved in real time. These joint working sessions will just reduce the time, the back and forth correspondence, and try to address any issues or questions or concerns as they arise. Do y'all have any questions about the new developing program reviews or anything with the substantial modification approval process? Okay, so moving on to Title VI requirements, particularly as they relate to the permit actions associated with the pretreatment substantial modification approvals. So the Title VI refers to the alternative language requirements for public notice found in Chapter 39 of the Texas Administrative Code. This new implementation procedure is the result of the informal resolution with the EPA to meet Title VI requirements. So how does this affect pretreatment? So basically, Title VI is applicable to the permit actions required to incorporate the pretreatment substantial modifications into the TPDES permit and approved programs. So how does this affect the CAs? So for y'all, this newly implemented review process does not add any additional requirements. It just updates the step in the process where the NAPD translation by the permittee takes place. So now it will be during the draft permit acceptance stage of the review where the permittee will be provided with the NAPD and required to provide the translated notice back to us with the acceptance of the draft permits. So most of the language should be translated in the template provided already. However, there are some specific details related to the wastewater treatment plants that may need to be translated by the permittee. So again, this will be requested during the permittee's review of the draft permit language, and then the permittee is required to submit back to the TCQ the translated NAPD along with any comments they may have on the draft permit. Are there any questions about the Title VI requirements or the new review process? Awesome. Thank you. Now I'll turn it over to Jessica.
Thank you, Bridget, for those updates on our program. Now we will discuss a few regulatory updates, starting with PFAS. So in October of 2021, EPA announced their PFAS strategic roadmap, laying out the whole agency's approach to addressing PFAS discharges throughout the country. The roadmap included numerous action items for the Office of Water, 4 of which will directly affect wastewater. These are the 4 listed on the screen. EPA has already taken action on a few of these items, which we will be discussing in the next few slides. So the first item on EPA's roadmap will directly affect industrial facilities and our pretreatment programs. The EPA plans to undertake rulemaking to restrict PFAS discharges from industrial categories where they already have determined the need to do so. This includes the organic chemicals, plastics and synthetic fibers category, OCPSF, as well as metal finishing and electroplating. The proposed rule is expected in summer 2023 for OCPSF and summer 2024 for metal finishing and electroplating. So right now, our suggestion to our control authorities and programs is to continue to identify your users who either manufacture, use, or otherwise process PFAS discharge substances on site, and just ensure that your IUs, your categorical industrial users, are aware of the final rule and then the upcoming revisions to those categorical standards. EPA will also launch detailed studies on facilities where EPA has the preliminary data to do so. Where they have preliminary data, but the data is insufficient to support potential rulemaking. So they need some additional more information, and these includes the electrical and electronic components, textiles mills, and landfills. EPA expects these studies to be done this fall of 2022 to inform themselves on further decision-making and rulemaking. And then EPA also intends to initiate data reviews for industrial categories where there is little known information on PFAS discharges. These include the leather tanning and finishing, plastics molding and forming, and paint formulating. EPA expects to complete these data reviews by winter of 2023 to see if there is sufficient data for rulemaking. And then in addition to the 9 industrial categories identified on the screen, the plan does also include the monitoring of categories where the phase-out of PFAS is projected by 2024. So that monitoring includes pulp, paper, and paperboards, as well as airports. And the results of this monitoring and whether any additional further regulatory action is needed will be addressed in EPA's final ELG Plan 15, which is supposed to be released sometime this fall. Now, in more recent news, EPA has announced progress on 3 of the action items for the Office of Water. In addition to EPA Draft Method 1633, EPA is also publishing a new method that can broadly screen for the presence of PFAS in water at part per billion. This is the EPA Draft Method 1621, has completed single laboratory validation, and this past summer was undergoing multi-laboratory validation. EPA intends to publish an updated final version of the method later this year. EPA also issued a memo which provides instructions for monitoring provisions, analytical methods, the use of pollution prevention, and best management practices to address PFAS and how they can be incorporated into NPDES permits. EPA also plans to issue new guidance to state permitting authorities, so we are waiting on that as well. And last, EPA has proposed the first aquatic life criteria for PFOA and PFAS, 2 of the most well-studied chemicals in the group. The criteria are intended to protect aquatic life from the short-term and long-term toxic effects of those 2 substances. Following the comment period, EPA does intend to issue final PFOA and PFAS recommended criteria, at which time states will then need to adopt and consider implementing them. And then lastly, we have, I'm going to briefly touch on the 2019 Hazardous Waste Pharmaceutical Rule. The 2019 rule prohibits all healthcare facilities and reverse distributors from disposing of hazardous waste pharmaceuticals down the drain. 2 fact sheets from EPA were published in April of this year. One is an introductory fact sheet aimed at a general audience, and the other is directed at POTWs. The general one covers what types of healthcare facilities must comply with the sewer ban, as well as what pharmaceuticals are considered hazardous and subject to the sewer ban. And then the second fact sheet is more for our audience, POTWs, who are responsible for enforcing the sewer prohibition and how control authorities may adapt their pretreatment program to enforce this rule. There are PDF versions of these fact sheets that also contain links to the information and can be accessed from the final rule page at epa.gov. And I do believe we also have some of these fact sheets printed in the room. So they're available if you would like. This concludes our regulatory updates. We would also like to announce that in an effort to increase outreach to stakeholders, the pretreatment team will be holding public stakeholder meetings semi-annually moving forward. So stay tuned for the next one in 2023. You can find updates on the pretreatment stakeholder website, and if you are not currently on our TCQ pretreatment stakeholder list, to receive correspondence, please email outreach@tcq.texas.gov. And I believe we have that email, on the link on the slide. Add yourself to that email to be added to receive updates about our upcoming meetings and events. And additionally, if you would like to watch a recording of this meeting, you can do so via webcasting by visiting the link on the screen. That works? Okay. And with that, I'd just like to thank everyone for joining us today. Questions?
So I'd like to make you guys aware that WHEAT is planning on submitting on behalf of the Pretreatment Knowledge Committee an updated letter concerning the updated MALs. And most of it reiterates previously identified and discussed items, but there are some new action items on there as well regarding the MALs. It should be pending immediately / sometime next week at the latest, so just to give you a heads up on that one.
Okay.
Additionally, selfishly enough, are you guys planning on submitting an abstract for Texas Water? Because that deadline is coming up very
On Monday.
soon.
Yeah.
Yes, we
we
know.
guys with management approval.
Okay,
Currently,
great.
yes, so we should have that submitted
look
soon.
forward to having you join us at that one as well and providing another opportunity for us as the regulated community to interact and hear from you all as well. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. As long as they'll accept our abstract, we'll be there.
I did have a question, Joseph, just to clarify that letter that are y'all directing that at the pretreatment team or the MUR work group?
This is specific to the pretreatment team.
Okay.
So
Okay, thank you.
In that letter, but also otherwise we have talked about possibly having a work group where there's actually a exchange about ideas and going back and forth. I mean, I could see a work group on this SOP that we talked earlier. Not necessarily, but I could see that may be beneficial. But we have verbally communicated on this influent effluent monitoring, which currently you made the decision of not making changes, but I think you were open to discussions further on. I know several of my clients are quite interested in it. Is that a possibility? Do you want to make it part of the stakeholder group, or maybe an intentional picking people, representative people who are interested in moving things forward in a work group and advancing important aspects? Are you still open to that?
I think we're still open to it, definitely. I mean, it may need to be within the framework of this stakeholder group meeting that we could do, kind of in the same spirit of a work group. Did you say that recommendation is going to be in the WHEAT letter that we should?
Yeah, it would be it's of course a separate issue, but it would be, we are also talking about a work group in that letter, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, that should get the ball rolling. When we get that letter, we can certainly start that conversation. I think it would need to be within the framework of our stakeholder group meetings. I think that's, ideally the point of these is to, get feedback from y'all, your suggestions, and, find common ground on where we can get traction on some of these issues. And back to the influent effluent monitoring, a decision has been made not to move forward on that, but we certainly, don't want to stop you guys from, bringing your suggestions or continuing that conversation with us. I don't know, right now how far we'll be able to get, but we're certainly able to keep the conversation going.
Okay. With regards to the work group, I understand that this is a formal, recognized forum and that you need to work around this. I could see a potential for a work group to be an informal that reports to this stakeholder group. So, because if it's so many people and with teams working or maybe not working, and that may not be practical and really making progress. So that's why I like the idea of a work group, and maybe it would be a work group that WHEAT creates and you participate, and then we report at the stakeholder group.
Right. That sounds like it could be feasible for sure. And I know that we had talked about, a work group specifically for like the TBLL data and that sort of thing. So I definitely think that would be beneficial for us as well, because we certainly want to get your feedback on something that, it's a new approach for us as well. So we want to make sure that we're taking everything into consideration and getting y'all's, knowledge and feedback. I know a lot of y'all have been doing this for a long time, so we certainly want, y'all's expertise. So anything to add to that, ladies? Anything else y'all would like to discuss today? Anything at all? Okay, well, we appreciate y'all making the trek down here. Like Erica said, I apologize to those who are going to attend online for the technical difficulties, but we will get this presentation posted as soon as possible. Like Bridget mentioned a couple of times, we will have the presentation posted, all of the links that we discussed, and then of course if you have any other questions that you think about after you leave today, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, anyone on the team. You can reach us directly or wqpret@tceq.texas.gov, and we're always more than happy to talk with you. So with that, I will close this meeting. Thank you again, everyone.